1541 Terrifying Orion. A few minutes passed in a strange, subdued atmosphere as the tension from earlier slowly dissolved into quiet preparation. The groups that had gathered in the garage began to move one after another, their departure orderly yet cautious, as if each of them understood that the moment they stepped out of the camp, they would be entering a world where survival was never guaranteed. Max watched them carefully. There was no unnecessary chatter now. No wasted movement. Every group moved with purpose. Seeing this, Max understood that it was time for them to leave as well. He turned his gaze toward Lucia and studied her expression for a brief moment. The earlier disturbance had clearly shaken her, but now she seemed to have regained her composure. The unease in her eyes had faded, replaced once again by the calm and focused demeanor he had seen before. Max felt a quiet sense of relief.
"Let us go,"
Rose said as she stepped forward, naturally taking the lead. Lucia moved alongside her, with Max and Isabella following just behind. Slightly to the side, the other group that Rose had agreed to guide also fell into formation. Without any formal signal, the two groups aligned themselves and began moving as one. Together, they left the garage. Step by step, they made their way toward the exit of the southern camp. As they walked, Max observed everything around him. The camp gradually thinned out as they approached the boundary, the structures becoming sparse, the presence of cultivators decreasing, and the atmosphere shifting into something far more uncertain. Beyond the camp lay Orion in its true form. Just before they reached the exit, Max noticed something that did not quite make sense to him.
"If thousands of people are heading toward the same destination,"
he said, his tone thoughtful,
"then why do guides not gather together and lead everyone at once? Would that not make things much safer? A larger group should be stronger."
Rose slowed her steps. Then she stopped completely. She turned her head and looked at Max, her expression carrying a faint smile that seemed to hold both amusement and something deeper.
"If only it were that simple,"
she said. Max frowned slightly, waiting for her explanation. Rose continued, her voice steady as she spoke from experience rather than theory.
"A guide can only lead a group of up to 10 people. That is the rule on Orion. No guide here dares to break it."
Max's frown deepened.
"Why?"
Rose's smile remained, but her eyes turned more serious.
"It is just how things are here,"
she said.
"Orion is not like other places. When too many people gather in one place, it draws attention."
She paused for a moment, letting her words settle before continuing.
"Not the kind of attention you want."
Her tone grew heavier as she spoke of the past.
"A long time ago, before this rule existed, guides used to lead large groups. Sometimes 100 people or more would travel together, believing that strength in numbers would guarantee their safety."
Max listened silently.
"One such group left,"
Rose said slowly.
"a large group full of strong and experienced people."
She looked ahead, her gaze distant as if recalling something she had heard many times.
"And none of them came back."
The air seemed to grow colder as she continued.
"Not a single one,"
she said.
"Not the people, not the guides. No one. They simply disappeared."
Max's eyes narrowed slightly.
"Nobody knows what happened to them."
Rose added.
"There were no traces, no signs of battle, no remains. It was as if they had been erased."
A brief silence followed.
"After that,"
she continued,
"the rule was established. No group should exceed 10 people. Ever since then, everyone has followed it without exception."
She turned to look at Max again.
"And since then, incidents like that have almost never happened again."
Max absorbed her words quietly. The logic was simple. But the implication was terrifying. What had happened to this place to make it so terrifying? Max thought deeply. He knew a long time ago a war had taken place in this place. A war so terrifying a true black dragon had fallen here. Max could hardly imagine a power capable of killing a true dragon.
"We are far enough from the other groups now."
Rose's voice broke through his thoughts. Max turned his gaze toward her. She had stopped briefly to observe their surroundings, her expression focused as she measured their position relative to the others. The groups that had left before them were now distant figures ahead, barely visible against the vast and broken landscape.
"It is time to move properly,"
she said. Without waiting for a response, Rose stepped forward and increased her pace, her movements becoming sharper and more deliberate as she began guiding them into the deeper regions of Orion. Lucia followed closely. Max and Isabella moved right behind her. Behind them, the camp slowly faded into the distance. The moment they stepped beyond the boundaries of the southern camp, the world changed. Inside the camp, even with its tension and constant alertness, there had been a sense of order. There were structures, people, and a rhythm that one could understand. Outside the camp, all of that disappeared. What replaced it was something far more primal. The ground itself looked wrong. It was not simply barren or lifeless. It felt as though it had been torn apart and then left to decay for countless years. The soil carried a dark red hue, not the natural red of minerals but something deeper, something that hinted at blood long dried into the very foundation of the land. Cracks spread across the surface in chaotic patterns, some shallow, some deep enough to swallow a person whole, as if the planet itself had once been split open under unimaginable force. The air was heavy. Each breath felt thicker, harder to draw, as though the atmosphere itself resisted their presence. There was a faint metallic scent mixed with something ancient and decayed, a lingering trace that refused to fade even after thousands of years. Max's eyes moved across the horizon. Ruins lay scattered everywhere. Not the kind built by time or erosion, but the kind left behind by destruction. Broken weapons half buried in the ground, massive fragments of unknown constructs, shattered pillars that once might have belonged to grand structures, all of them scattered without order as if they had been thrown aside during a chaotic battle. Some pieces still carried faint energy fluctuations, remnants of power that had not completely dissipated. In the distance, the land was uneven, rising and falling in unnatural ways. Entire sections looked as if they had been melted and then solidified again, while others were carved out into deep trenches that stretched far beyond what the eye could see. There were no signs of life in these areas. No plants. No movement. Only silence. A suffocating silence. Max felt it clearly. This was not just a dangerous place. This was a graveyard. A battlefield where something unimaginable had taken place. What happened here, to make it like this? The thought rose in his mind as he looked at the devastation surrounding them. He knew that a war had once taken place on Orion. He had heard that much already. But seeing it with his own eyes was something entirely different. This was not a normal war. This was destruction on a scale he could barely comprehend. 1542 Order to not attack.
Do not wander off by yourself.
Rose warned as she led the group forward, her voice firm and carrying an authority that made it clear she would not repeat herself. There was no room for carelessness here. Every step on Orion had to be measured, every decision deliberate. Max's group stayed close to her right side, while the other group followed along her left. No one spoke unnecessarily. The earlier commotion had already faded into the background, replaced by a focused silence as everyone adjusted to the harsh reality of the world beyond the camp. The path ahead was a silent testament to destruction. They moved through a land that could not be described as anything other than a graveyard of an ancient war. Ruins lay scattered in every direction, remnants of structures that once stood tall but had long since been reduced to fragments. Some areas were littered with shattered armor and broken weapons, half buried in the ground as if they had been left behind in the middle of a desperate struggle. In other places, large skeletal remains could be seen, some belonging to creatures so massive that even their bones radiated a faint and unsettling aura. It was not just a battlefield. It was a place where countless lives had ended. Even though Orion was known as a red planet, Max noticed something strange as they walked deeper into it. The red that defined the planet was almost completely absent here. The ground was dark, the sky felt dim, and the overall tone of the surroundings was muted and lifeless. It was as if whatever had happened here had stripped the planet of its original color, replacing it with something far more bleak. Max continued observing everything carefully when suddenly his perception shifted. Through his dimensional sovereign body, he sensed movement. Not just a single presence. Many. His eyes narrowed slightly as he focused. A group of wolves was approaching from their right. No. Not just a group. A horde. Their numbers were massive, easily reaching into the hundreds, perhaps even more. Their presence was chaotic yet coordinated, their movements swift as they cut through the ruined terrain toward them. What the hell, where did so many of them come from? Max frowned deeply, the sudden appearance of such a large group catching even him off guard. Without hesitation, he spoke, his voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear.
To our right, a horde of wolves is heading toward us.
The effect was immediate. Everyone became alert. The two groups shifted their attention toward the direction Max had indicated, their bodies instinctively preparing for battle as the tension in the air rose sharply. All except one. Rose did not turn. Her expression remained solemn, but it lacked the alarm that the others felt. Instead of reacting with urgency, she seemed to have anticipated something like this. Then she spoke.
Listen carefully.
She said, her voice steady and commanding.
Do not attack them.
Her words cut through the rising tension.
I repeat,
She continued, her gaze forward as she walked.
do not attack the wolves.
The two groups hesitated. Confusion spread across their faces.
They will approach us.
Rose explained.
They will smell us, assess us, and then move on. As long as we do not provoke them, they will not attack.
Her tone grew firmer.
So, no matter what happens, do not make a move. Do not release aura. Do not attack. Just stand your ground.
Even though many did not understand the reasoning behind her command, they could feel the confidence in her voice. And more importantly, they knew one thing. She was the guide. Reluctantly, both groups nodded, suppressing their instincts to fight as they prepared to face whatever was coming without resistance. With Rose's warning still lingering in their minds, the two groups continued walking forward in tense silence. Every step felt heavier than before, and even the sound of their own movement seemed too loud in the vast stillness of Orion. The air had grown sharper, carrying a faint unease that pressed against their senses. A few moments later, the horde of wolves finally came into view. At first, they appeared as shadows moving across the broken terrain, but as they drew closer, their forms became clear. One after another, dozens turned into hundreds. Their bodies were lean and powerful, their fur dark and rough, and their eyes gleamed with a cold, predatory light that sent a chill down the spine. The sheer number alone was enough to shake even seasoned cultivators. Some of the people in the group instinctively tightened their grip on their weapons. Others felt their breathing grow heavier as panic crept into their minds. Being surrounded by a single powerful beast was one thing, but being surrounded by hundreds was an entirely different matter. The wolves moved swiftly. In the span of a few breaths, they had already arrived. Then, without attacking, they began to circle. They surrounded the 9 humans completely. From every direction, pairs of glowing eyes stared at them. Low growls echoed faintly, and the oppressive presence of the pack settled over the group like an invisible net. The entire group came to a halt. No one dared to move. Rose's earlier warning echoed clearly in their minds, forcing them to suppress their instincts. Even though their bodies were screaming at them to fight, to defend themselves, they held back. Not a single attack was launched. The wolves continued to stare. Their gazes were sharp, almost intelligent, as if they were observing rather than hunting. They moved slowly, circling, sniffing the air, their attention focused entirely on the humans in their midst. Max stood still, his expression calm, but his senses were fully active. Through his dimensional sovereign body, he observed them carefully. Then, something clicked. His eyes narrowed slightly. These wolves, they are not real. The realization came suddenly, but once it formed, everything began to make sense. They are just condensed forms of energy, Max thought. Manifestations created by something far more powerful. He could feel it now. Beneath the surface of each wolf, there was no true life force, no independent existence. What they carried instead was a unified signature, something that connected all of them to a single origin. A much stronger predator. 1543 War between primordials and devils. Max's gaze turned slightly distant as he tried to trace that origin, but it was faint, hidden far beyond his immediate perception. But why send these instead of coming directly, he wondered. The answer did not come immediately. And just as that thought lingered, the situation changed. Without any warning, the wolves stopped circling. Then, as if some unseen command had been given, they began to leave. One by one. Group by group. They turned away, their predatory gazes lingering for a brief moment before they retreated into the distance. The oppressive atmosphere that had surrounded the group slowly lifted as the horde disappeared just as suddenly as it had appeared. Within a short time, not a single wolf remained. The area returned to silence. Only then did the group finally exhale. Relief washed over them as the tension that had been holding them in place faded away.
What just happened?
Isabella asked, her voice filled with confusion as she looked around.
Why did they not attack us?
Max let out a small breath before answering, a faint smile appearing on his face.
Because they were never real wolves to begin with.
He said.
They were just condensed forms of energy, created by a much more powerful predator.
Rose looked at him, a hint of surprise flashing in her eyes. She had not expected him to see through it so quickly. After a brief pause, she nodded.
That is correct,
she said.
Those were not real creatures. They were constructs created by something much stronger.
Her expression turned more serious as she continued.
And this was not just that. It was a trap.
The group stiffened slightly at her words.
If even one of you had attacked,
she said slowly,
the situation would have changed completely.
Max's gaze sharpened.
What kind of trap?
Rose's eyes grew colder as she explained.
The moment one of those wolves is destroyed, all of them would collapse into pure energy. That energy would then surround us completely, trapping us within it.
She paused briefly before continuing.
And once that happens, we would all fall asleep.
A chill ran through the group.
At that point,
Rose said, her voice low.
the true predator behind them would appear.
Her gaze swept across the empty land where the wolves had vanished.
And we would be nothing more than prey waiting to be consumed.
Silence followed her words. This was Orion. Even what looked harmless could be a death sentence.
Why did the predator not attack us directly?
Max asked as they continued moving, his gaze still lingering in the direction where the wolves had disappeared. Rose did not slow down as she answered, her voice calm and certain.
Because it knows.
She said.
It knows that among us, there are people strong enough to kill it.
Max listened carefully.
The creatures on Orion are not like those outside.
Rose continued.
They're not driven by instinct alone. They have intelligence. Real intelligence. They observe, they calculate, and they decide whether a fight is worth it or not. That predator judged us and decided the risk was too high.
Max nodded slowly. That explained everything. It was not that the predator could not attack. It simply chose not to. As they continued walking deeper into the scarred lands of Orion, Max's thoughts shifted back to the earlier scene, to the ruins, the destruction, and the overwhelming sense of something ancient lingering in the air. After a brief silence, he spoke again.
Miss Rose,
He said.
do you know what kind of war led to this?
His voice carried a genuine curiosity. If anyone could answer that question, it would be someone like Rose, who had spent years navigating this world. Rose remained silent for a moment, as if organizing her thoughts. Then she spoke.
I've been on Orion for quite some time.
She said.
And during that time, I have looked into its past. Not everything is known, and much of it has been lost, but there are fragments of truth scattered across the divine realm.
Her gaze shifted slightly as she continued walking, her tone turning more serious.
A long time ago, there was a war in the divine realm.
She said.
Not a small conflict between forces. Not a dispute between families or clans. It was something far greater.
Max's attention sharpened.
That war spread across every star realm.
Rose continued.
No corner of the divine realm was untouched. Entire regions were engulfed in chaos. Countless forces were drawn into it, willingly or unwillingly. It was a war that reshaped the balance of power across existence.
She paused briefly before adding.
And for reasons that are still unclear, Orion became one of its main battlefields.
Max's eyes narrowed slightly as he listened.
This planet,
Rose said.
was once not like this. It was not a dead world filled with ruins. It was a place of life. But during that war, it became a convergence point.
Her voice lowered slightly.
Powerhouses from different realms gathered here. Holy lords, holy kings, and even beings who had reached the divine master realm fought on this land.
The weight of her words settled heavily in the air.
These were existences that could destroy stars.
She continued.
And they fought here.
Max's heart grew heavy. Rose's expression turned more solemn as she continued.
From what I've gathered, the core of that war was tied to the devils.
She said.
It was not just a battle for territory or power. It was something deeper.
She glanced briefly at Max.
It was a war between the primordials and the devils.
The words carried a profound weight.
That conflict swept across the entire divine realm.
She said.
It was not limited to a single place. But Orion became one of the places where the most intense battles took place.
Max remained silent. He hadn't expected it was the devils again. It was because of them the war took place.
Because of that war,
Rose continued.
this planet was left in this state. Its laws were disrupted. Its structure was broken. Even now, traces of those battles remain.
She looked ahead as the ruined landscape stretched endlessly before them.
That is why Orion is called a forbidden planet.
There was a brief pause.
But even so,
She added.
people still come.
Her tone carried a faint bitterness.
They come because they believe that within this destruction lie opportunities. The inheritance of fallen experts, ancient techniques, lost treasures, power that could change their fate.
She let out a small breath.
But most of them never leave.
Her words were calm, but the meaning behind them was clear.
They come chasing opportunity.
She said.
But in reality, many of them are simply walking toward their own deaths.
The group fell silent as they continued forward. 1544 Encountering strange things. For quite a few minutes nothing happened. It was peaceful, but the peace was soon shattered. A group of beasts emerged from beneath the broken terrain without warning, their bodies fused with the land itself as if they had been born from the very ruins of war. Their forms were twisted, their limbs uneven, and their eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural light. The moment they surfaced, they attacked without hesitation. Rose reacted instantly.
Prepare for battle,
she ordered. The group moved as one, forming a loose defensive formation as the beasts charged toward them. The clash was brief but intense. The beasts were not weak, but they were not beyond what the group could handle. Their strength lay in their unpredictability, in the way they emerged without warning and attacked with reckless ferocity. However, the two groups were not weak either. They fought relentlessly against these beasts and started killing them. Within moments, the beasts were gone. Not slain in the traditional sense, but broken apart into fragments of energy that dissipated into the air.
These are zombies or what?
Max thought, his eyes narrowing slightly. Rose glanced at him briefly, as if she knew what he had realized, but she said nothing. Instead, she simply motioned for the group to move on. As they continued, the encounters became stranger. There were areas they passed where the ground seemed to breathe, rising and falling ever so slightly as if something massive slumbered beneath it. Rose instructed them to walk along a specific path, warning them not to deviate even a single step. No one questioned her. At another point, they came across a field filled with faintly glowing fragments suspended in the air. They looked harmless, almost beautiful, drifting slowly like fireflies. One of the members from the other group instinctively reached out, but Rose stopped him immediately, her voice sharp and commanding.
Do not touch anything.
She told them not to touch anything, and the firmness in her tone made it clear that this was not a suggestion but a command that had to be followed without question. There was no room for doubt in her voice, and even those who did not understand the danger instinctively withdrew their hands. Max could feel it as well. The fragments floating in the air were not simple energy constructs. There was something deeply wrong about them. They carried a faint distortion, something unstable that bent the surrounding space in subtle and unnatural ways. Even standing near them caused a discomfort that seeped into his senses, as if reality itself was slightly misaligned in that area. I can feel very unstable concept of space from these fragments. Max thought as he examined them in his mind. Without wasting time, the group moved past that region quickly, careful not to make contact with anything. Not long after, the situation changed again. Rose did not slow down or explain anything this time. Instead, she gave a single command.
Everyone run.
Her voice was low but carried urgency that none of them could ignore. There was no explanation, no visible threat, and no time to question her. Yet every single one of them understood that whatever had triggered that command was far beyond something they could casually face. The group did not hesitate. They ran. Their movements became swift and focused as they followed Rose without deviation. The air behind them seemed to shift, though none of them turned to look. But Max with his dimensional sovereign body saw nothing. He only just felt a presence. It was massive, ancient, and overwhelmingly oppressive, unlike anything they had encountered so far. It did not feel like a beast or a cultivator. It felt like something far older, something that had existed long before them and would continue to exist long after. However, just when they were considerable distance from their original location where they started running was when Max saw something that sent a chill down his spine. He saw that ground beneath that area where they had been previously standing disappeared all of a sudden. Through his dimensional sovereign body, he clearly saw a big black hole appeared in that region. But that black hole disappeared as soon as it came and the situation returned to normal. What the hell was that? Max frowned. The two groups kept running. Nobody slowed down even a little and kept a close distance to Rose. They ran until that presence gradually faded from their senses, until the oppressive feeling loosened its grip on them and the tremors beneath their feet ceased. Only then did Rose finally slow her pace.
What was that?
Lucia asked this time. Rose shook his head.
Nothing. Let's continue.
Since Rose didn't tell them, the two groups didn't ask anymore as they continued their journey. But only Max knew what they were running for. Though he couldn't understand why Rose didn't tell them what they'd been running away from. As the journey continued, they were heading closer to their destination. They fought when they had no choice but to fight, cutting down creatures that stood in their path. They ignored things that seemed strange yet not immediately threatening, trusting Rose's judgment without question. And when faced with something beyond their ability to confront, they ran without hesitation. Step by step, they moved deeper into Orion. The world around them felt increasingly unstable, as if it did not follow the same rules they were used to. Time itself seemed uncertain, moments stretching or compressing in ways that were difficult to grasp. Distances became unreliable, with locations appearing closer or farther than they should have been. Without Rose guiding them, it would have been impossible to tell whether they were advancing toward their destination or simply wandering aimlessly through a broken world. After what felt like hours of careful movement, the atmosphere began to change once again. This time, it was different. The air did not grow heavier or suffocating. It became unstable. There was a subtle fracture in it, as if the very fabric of space had been disturbed. Max felt it immediately. His senses picked up on the distortions, faint at first but growing more noticeable with each step they took. The ground beneath them bore new kinds of scars, not the result of battles or destruction, but something far more unnatural. These were marks left by something that had torn through reality itself. Rose slowed down as she sensed it as well.
"We are close,"
she said. Ahead of them, the land opened into a vast and uneven terrain. The space itself seemed to flicker faintly, as if it could not fully maintain its structure. It was not a visible tear yet, but the signs were undeniable. Max's eyes sharpened as he looked ahead. The crack. They had reached its vicinity. 1545 arriving.
"We are very close to the area where the crack in the void has appeared,"
Rose said as she slowed her pace slightly, her tone carrying a quiet seriousness that immediately drew everyone's attention.
"Because of that, the spatial laws here are unstable. You must be careful."
Her warning was not exaggerated. Even without her words, Max could already feel it. The air around them was no longer normal. It did not feel heavy or oppressive like before. Instead, it felt inconsistent, as if space itself could not maintain a fixed structure. There were subtle distortions in every direction, small fluctuations that caused the surroundings to appear slightly misaligned for brief moments. It was not enough to disorient someone completely, but it was enough to make one uneasy. Rose continued forward without hesitation, and both groups followed her closely, their movements becoming even more controlled than before. Interestingly, now that they had entered this region, the journey became strangely quiet. There were no beasts. No sudden disturbances. No strange phenomena attempting to lure or trap them. The silence was almost unnatural. It was as if everything that existed on Orion instinctively avoided this place, unwilling to approach whatever lay ahead. And they saw it. Before them stood a massive structure formed of interlocking hexagonal panels, each one glowing faintly with a controlled and steady light. These hexagonal force fields extended outward in a layered formation, creating a barrier that enclosed a specific region of space. The structure was enormous, rising high and spreading wide, its presence dominating everything around it. Max's gaze shifted past the force fields. And then he saw it. The crack. It was not a simple tear. It was a fracture in space itself. Within the boundaries of the hexagonal force fields, the fabric of reality appeared broken, as if something had forcibly ripped it apart. The crack flickered irregularly, its edges unstable, constantly shifting between existence and distortion. Within it, darkness churned, not a simple absence of light but something deeper, something that seemed to absorb everything around it. Max could feel a faint pull emanating from it, not strong enough to drag them in, but enough to make its presence known.
"We have arrived,"
Rose said, a faint smile appearing on her face as she gestured toward the scene before them.
"As you can see,"
she continued,
"the crack in the void is currently being stabilized by those hexagonal force fields."
her tone became slightly more serious as she explained further.
"When it first appeared, it caused a great deal of panic. People feared that it would continue to spread across Orion, tearing apart the already unstable structure of this planet. There were also concerns that something might emerge from it."
Max narrowed his eyes slightly. That possibility was not far-fetched. Rose nodded slightly as if confirming that thought.
To prevent that, several forces came together and placed these force fields around the crack. Their purpose is to contain it, stabilize it, and prevent any further expansion.
Her gaze lingered on the crack for a moment.
Right now, it is under control.
She paused briefly before adding.
At least for the time being. Is this crack truly connected to the mortal realm?
Max asked, his eyes fixed on the unstable fracture within the layered force fields as he turned slightly toward Rose. Rose nodded without hesitation.
Yes,
she said.
When the crack first appeared and the forces managed to stabilize it, several groups sent people inside to investigate. They wanted to confirm where it led before taking any further action.
Her gaze briefly shifted toward the crack as she continued.
From what I know, Those who entered reported that it indeed leads to the mortal realms.
Max's eyes narrowed slightly as he absorbed her words. Rose added.
There are also rumors that this crack is not just a random tear. It is believed to be connected to the Ascension Tunnel itself, the pathway that normally links the mortal realms to the divine realm. That is why it appeared in such a structured way, rather than collapsing immediately.
Max nodded slowly, his thoughts deepening as he considered the implications. If that was true, then this was not just an accident. It was a disruption in one of the fundamental connections between realms.
Has there been any further development?
Max asked, his tone steady. Rose shook her head.
I do not know.
She replied honestly.
Even if something new has happened, I would not necessarily be informed. Information like that is controlled by the forces managing this place.
She then turned her attention away from the crack and looked at Lucia and the others.
My task ends here,
She said.
I will remain nearby. If you need to return, you can contact me.
Without waiting for a response, she walked off toward another section of the area where several other guides could be seen interacting with different groups. Her figure gradually blended into the activity surrounding the force fields. A brief silence followed her departure. Then Lucia turned toward Max.
What are you planning to do now?
She asked. Max did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the crack, his mind already working through possibilities. After a moment, he spoke.
Can I enter it?
Lucia frowned slightly as she followed his line of sight.
I do not know.
She said.
Look around.
Max shifted his attention. There were too many people gathered around the force fields. Cultivators from different forces stood at varying distances, observing, discussing, and in some cases, waiting. The hexagonal barriers were massive, extending far enough to keep the crack contained while still allowing a large number of people to view it from outside. Because of the sheer scale and the crowd, it was impossible to clearly understand what was happening closer to the core. No one here seemed to have unrestricted access.
We cannot even see everything clearly from here.
Lucia continued.
There are likely restrictions in place. The forces that stabilize the crack would not allow anyone to approach it freely.
Max remained silent, his thoughts sharpening.
Could your friend Rose help?
He asked after a moment, glancing at Lucia. Lucia let out a small sigh and shook her head.
I was hoping she might.
She admitted.
But as you saw, she chose to leave.
Her gaze shifted briefly toward the direction Rose had gone.
She would not have walked away like that unless she had no intention of getting involved further.
Lucia added.
Whatever we are planning to do here, she does not want to interfere.
1546 Agitation in the bloodline. Hearing Lucia's words, Max let out a quiet sigh. If Rose had chosen not to get involved any further, then he had no intention of forcing her hand. This was already stepping into uncertain territory, and dragging someone unwilling into it would only complicate things further. He was just beginning to think about his next move when something suddenly changed within him. His heart began to pound. Thump. 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 The sound echoed loudly in his ears, far louder than it should have been, as if each beat carried an unnatural force behind it. Max's expression shifted instantly. What is happening? A flicker of unease rose within him as the rhythm of his heartbeat grew faster, heavier, more intense with each passing moment. He tried to steady himself, taking a deep breath to calm down, but instead of slowing, his heart began to race even faster. Thump. 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 The force behind each beat grew stronger. Then his body reacted. A faint tremor spread through him at first, subtle enough that he barely noticed it, but within seconds it intensified. His muscles tightened, his control slipping as the tremble spread from his core to his limbs.
Max, are you all right?
Isabella's voice came immediately as she noticed the change. Lucia turned as well, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw his condition. Max's entire body was trembling uncontrollably.
Max, what is going on?
Lucia asked, her tone sharp with concern.
I do not know.
Max replied, his voice strained as he forced himself to breathe steadily. He could feel it clearly now. Heat was building inside his body, rising rapidly as his heart continued to pound. It was not normal. It was not something he could control.
Calm down,
Lucia said as she stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. The moment her hand made contact, she flinched and pulled back immediately.
Your body, it is burning,
she said, shock flashing across her face.
What is happening to you?
Max realized it as well. The heat was real. It was not just a sensation. His body temperature had risen to an abnormal level, and it continued to climb with every passing second. No. I have to stop this. A sharp determination rose within him as he bit down on his lip without hesitation. Pain surged through him as blood began to flow, but he used it to anchor himself, to regain control over his thoughts. He forced his eyes to close slightly as he turned his attention inward. If something was wrong, then the answer had to be within his body. His senses moved through his internal state, scanning every part of himself with precision. And then he found it. His heavenly luminance divine bloodline. It was not stable. It was pulsing. Each beat of his heart was accompanied by a strange fluctuation within that bloodline, as if it was reacting to something outside, something nearby. It was not just active. It was agitated. What is happening to this bloodline? Max frowned deeply, unable to immediately understand the cause. But he did not waste time searching for answers. He immediately acted. Dragon scales. Without hesitation, Max activated the power of his black dragon chaotic bloodline. The moment it surged through him, it pressed against the heavenly luminance divine bloodline, suppressing it slightly. The effect was immediate. The violent fluctuations eased just a little and the trembling reduced. Seeing that it worked, Max did not hold back. He activated all of his dragon scales. All 2,000 of them. A powerful force surged through his body, completely overwhelming the unstable fluctuations of the heavenly luminance divine bloodline. The suppression became absolute, forcing it into silence. Only then did the violent reaction stop. His heart gradually slowed. The heat within his body began to recede and the trembling completely faded away. Max opened his eyes again, his breathing finally returning to normal.
I am fine,
he said, his voice steady once more as he looked at Isabella and Lucia. Lucia did not look convinced.
What just happened to you?
She asked, her expression still tense. Max frowned slightly as he answered.
That, I do not know.
Just as the words left his mouth, Max's attention shifted once again. Through his dimensional sovereign body, his perception expanded beyond what normal senses could grasp, scanning the surroundings with precision. Among the countless figures gathered near the hexagonal barriers, one presence suddenly stood out. A young elf male. He was walking calmly toward the force fields. There was nothing particularly flashy about his appearance at first glance, yet something about him made Max felt his blood churn. The moment Max's senses locked onto him, something inside his body reacted violently. The heavenly luminance divine bloodline, which had just been suppressed moments ago, began to stir again. It pulsed sharply, as if it had been awakened by the mere presence of that elf. Max's expression changed instantly. It is reacting to him? Shock flashed across his mind as he felt the familiar heat begin to rise again, though this time it was more contained due to the active suppression from his dragon scales. Even so, the agitation within his bloodline was undeniable. His gaze sharpened. Why would his bloodline react to an elf? Just then, a memory surfaced within Max's mind. Lenavera. She too was an elf, and there had once been a strange connection between her bloodline and his own. That faint resonance had been subtle, almost gentle, something that hinted at compatibility rather than conflict. For a brief moment, Max wondered if what he was sensing now was the same phenomenon. But the thought lasted only an instant. He rejected it immediately.
No, this is different.
Max muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing as his focus sharpened further. This was not the same kind of resonance. Through his dimensional sovereign body, Max began observing the elf more carefully, pushing his perception to analyze every detail. The elf's aura was restrained, almost perfectly controlled, but as he observed him more and more, Max realized what was causing his bloodline to agitate as he reached a very dangerous conclusion. 1547 Fury burns the heart, 1.
This elf carries my bloodline.
The words barely left Max's lips, yet the moment they did, something inside him shattered into absolute clarity. There was no mistake. There could be no mistake. The violent reaction of his heavenly luminance divine bloodline was not without reason. It was responding to its origin. It was responding to something that rightfully belonged to him, now existing within another. His gaze locked onto the young elf, and in that instant, everything connected. The strange resonance. The agitation within his blood. The instinctive pull that felt both familiar and unbearable. It all pointed to one truth. The source of his divine bloodline, the very essence that defined him, was inside that elf. And then the memories came. Flashes of blood. Screams that still echoed in the deepest corners of his mind. The night his world had been torn apart. His family, gone. Everything he had known, erased. All because of that bloodline. All because he had awakened something he was never meant to keep. His fists clenched slowly, the trembling not born from fear but from something far darker. He remembered the moment it was taken from him. The unbearable pain as his bloodline source was forcefully extracted, leaving him on the brink of death, abandoned like something that had outlived its use. He had survived, barely, crawling out of that abyss with nothing left. Nothing, except hatred. But even then, even through all the suffering, he had never imagined this. He had never imagined that the ones who destroyed him would go so far as to implant his bloodline into one of their own. That they would take what was his, what cost him everything, and treat it as nothing more than a resource to be transferred, to be used, to be possessed. A cold silence fell over him, but beneath it, something monstrous was rising. The fury did not explode outward. It sank inward, condensing, compressing, becoming heavier with every passing second until it felt like his very chest could no longer contain it. His breathing slowed, yet each breath burned like fire tearing through his lungs. His eyes darkened, the calm within them twisting into something terrifying. And now, it was standing right in front of him. Inside someone else. The injustice of it clawed at his mind, tearing apart the last fragments of restraint he still held. The pain, the loss, the humiliation, all of it surged together, merging into a single, overwhelming emotion that consumed him entirely. It was hatred, hatred so deep that it intends to devour everything in his path.
Max, what is going on?
Lucia's voice trembled as she called out to him, her eyes filled with unease as she tried to understand the sudden change in him. At the sound of her voice, Max turned his head slowly. His gaze fell upon her, yet there was nothing in it. No warmth. No hesitation. No trace of the person she knew. His eyes were empty, frighteningly so, as if everything within him had already been decided.
Lucia, Isabella,
he said quietly, his tone steady and unervingly calm.
For now, pretend you don't know me.
The word struck like a blade. Lucia's expression stiffened, her worry twisting into fear as she took a step forward.
What are you talking about?
She asked, her voice tightening as a bad feeling took root in her chest. Max did not look away. His face remained composed, but the calmness he displayed only made his next words more terrifying.
I am about to do something stupid and reckless,
he said, his voice low yet filled with absolute conviction, as though he had already accepted the consequences.
If I do not let the hatred in my heart burn, then I know I will no longer be myself.
A brief silence followed, heavy and suffocating.
So please,
he continued, his tone softening just a fraction.
Act like you don't know me. What?
Lucia's mind struggled to catch up with his words, confusion and dread colliding within her, but before she could question him further, Max had already turned away. In the next instant, he vanished. By the time anyone could react, his figure had already appeared high above the elves, suspended in the air like a descending calamity. The sudden appearance of a masked human immediately drew their attention, their senses sharpening as tension spread through their ranks. Max now wore a plain white mask instead of the black dragon mask Lucia had given him, its expressionless surface concealing everything beneath. He had no intention of letting what was about to happen trace back to the Black Dragon clan.
Human, who are you?
One of the elves demanded, his voice sharp with authority.
What do you want from us?
Max did not hesitate.
I want all of you to die.
The moment the words left his mouth, his entire body erupted with violent energy. 7-colored lightning surged around him, flickering wildly as his figure blurred into motion. With extreme speed and heaven's wraith fully unleashed, he transformed into a streak of radiant lightning that tore through the air. In less than a heartbeat, he appeared directly before the young elf.
D.
The word came out like a verdict as Max's fist shot forward, carrying the full force of his strength, infused with the terrifying power of 7-colored lightning.
Protect the young master.
The elves were stunned. An attack like this, in broad daylight, without warning, was beyond anything they had expected. Yet their instincts moved faster than their shock. The young elf himself barely had time to react. Caught completely off guard, he could only raise his arms in a desperate attempt to block. A deafening explosion rang out. The impact sent the young elf flying like a broken projectile, his body crashing violently into the distance as the force of the strike rippled outward, stirring chaos among the surrounding crowd near the hexagonal barriers.
Young master.
Shouts of alarm erupted as 2 elves immediately rushed toward him, while the remaining 3 stepped forward, surrounding Max in a tight formation, their killing intent surging.
I'm Phoenix.
The young elf said through clenched teeth as he lay on the ground, forcing himself upright with the help of his subordinates. Blood stained his lips, but his aura remained steady. Despite the sudden assault, his strength at the peak of the law refinement realm had allowed him to survive what would have otherwise been a fatal strike. Not far ahead, Max stood unmoving, seven-colored lightning still dancing across his body.
You are dead.
The voice came from one of the three elves who had encircled him. It was an elderly man, his presence heavy and oppressive, clearly the leader among them. The two beside him looked like guards of the young master, their eyes locked onto Max with cold hostility. All three of them radiated terrifying power. Each one stood at the peak of the law manifestation realm. 1548 Fury burns the heart, too. A wave of shock rippled through everyone gathered around the hexagonal barrier as the scene unfolded before their eyes, leaving them momentarily stunned in disbelief. No one had expected something like this to happen here of all places. Even though Orion was a chaotic place and such things frequently happened here, the fact that it was a human attacking the elves was shocked the most. What made it even more absurd in their eyes was not just the act itself, but the person behind it. A human whose strength was only at the peak of the rebirth realm. Attacking a group of elves who stood at the peak of the law manifestation realm. To them, it was not bravery. It was madness.
Who is that man? How does someone at the peak of the rebirth realm dare to attack elves? Whoever he is, his death is already certain. Facing elves at the peak of law manifestation realm is nothing less than courting death. What a complete fool. Even if he carried hatred toward the elves, he should have endured it. Charging at them like this is no different from throwing his life away.
Voices rose one after another, filled with disbelief, ridicule, and certainty. Not a single person present believed that the masked human had even the slightest chance of survival. In their eyes, his fate had already been sealed the moment he made his move. The commotion quickly spread, drawing the attention of nearly every force gathered around the hexagonal barrier. Powerful presences turned toward the battlefield, their gazes sharpening with interest as they assessed the unfolding situation. Among them stood a young woman with long violet hair, her posture elegant and composed as she observed the chaos from a distance. Her aura was restrained, yet it carried an unmistakable depth that revealed her origin. She belonged to the Sword God Palace, one of the most dominant powers in the divine realm.
Has he lost his mind?
She murmured under her breath, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched Max's reckless assault. Beside her, an elderly man stepped forward, his expression cautious.
Miss, should I intervene?
He asked respectfully.
If a battle escalates here, it could destabilize the crack being suppressed by the hexagonal formation.
She shook her head without hesitation.
There is no need,
she replied calmly.
He is only at the peak of the rebirth realm. Those elves will deal with him in moments. This will not be enough to affect the crack.
Not far from them stood another group, clearly separate in identity and presence. Their bearing was different, sharper, carrying a certain arrogance that spoke of their strength. At their center, a young man let out a faint chuckle as he watched the scene unfold.
I have never seen someone this foolish,
he said with amusement.
To attack elves with such weak strength like this. I wonder if he has already lost his mind.
Laughter followed his words, light yet mocking, as the others around him echoed his sentiment. They were members of the Accession Hall, another top-tier force that held immense influence within the divine realm. Beyond these two groups, numerous other forces had also gathered. Second-rate powers, third-rate factions, wandering cultivators, all drawn by the sudden eruption of conflict. Every gaze was fixed on the masked figure, curiosity mixing with anticipation as they waited to witness the inevitable outcome. Yet among all those watching, there were only two whose hearts were gripped by genuine worry. Lucia and Isabella. They stood amidst the crowd, their eyes locked onto Max, their expressions filled with disbelief that had yet to fully settle. They had never imagined he would go this far, never thought he would throw himself directly into such a deadly confrontation without hesitation.
This is bad. This is really bad.
Lucia muttered under her breath, panic rising uncontrollably within her as she clenched her fists. This situation had spiraled far beyond anything she could have prepared for. Beside her, Isabella remained silent. Unlike Lucia, she held herself together, her expression calm on the surface, yet her eyes betrayed the storm beneath. She understood the weight of what Max had just done. By attacking those elves, he had stepped into a situation where retreat would no longer be simple. He had placed himself directly in the path of danger. And there was no easy way out anymore.
Die, you insolent brat.
Just at that moment a roar tore through the air as the elves finally moved. The elderly elf's expression twisted with fury, his hand rising as a blazing golden light gathered within his palm before he struck forward without hesitation. The attack descended with terrifying speed, so fast that even Max's dimensional sovereign body could barely register it in time. And then it hit him. Bang! A violent force slammed into him, sending his body hurtling through the air like a broken projectile. He crashed into the distance with overwhelming momentum, the ground trembling beneath the impact as debris scattered outward. The surrounding crowd reacted instantly, retreating in all directions, clearing a path as no one dared to remain in the trajectory of such a battle.
No, no.
Lucia's voice trembled as she saw Max being thrown away like that, panic surging through her as she instinctively moved forward, ready to rush to him. But before she could take another step, Isabella caught her wrist and held her firmly in place.
If we interfere now, we will doom the entire Black Dragon clan.
Isabella said, her voice low yet resolute, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. Lucia froze. The weight of those words struck her harder than the scene itself. Her mind raced, and in that moment, Max's earlier words echoed within her. Pretend like you don't know me. Her lips tightened as she bit down hard, forcing herself to stop, even though every instinct within her screamed to run to him. In the distance, the elderly elf let out a cold sneer as he watched the aftermath.
He should be dead.
He said dismissively, his tone filled with absolute certainty.
Go, bring me his body. I will search his soul myself, and find out which force dared to send someone to ambush our young master.
The two elves beside him nodded and began moving toward where Max had fallen, their expressions calm, as if this was already over. But then, they stopped. Because Max stood up slowly. As if the previous strike had not been enough to break him.
What, he's still alive?
The elderly elf's eyes narrowed in disbelief, genuine shock flashing across his face. He had not held back. That attack had been more than sufficient to kill someone at the Rebirth realm. And yet, here he was. Standing, Max lifted his head.
I want all of you to die.
His voice was low, but the hatred within it was suffocating, so dense that it seemed to distort the air itself. His eyes burned with a cold, relentless fury, and as that hatred surged through him, something deep within his being stirred in response. Something dark. Something forbidden. Something that had been silent, until now. From the depths of his existence, the infernal demon power began to awaken once again. At first, it was only a faint whisper of temptation. It slithered through his mind like a shadow, wrapping itself around his thoughts, feeding on the storm of emotions raging within him. Hatred. Pain. Loss. The perfect fuel.
Why hold back?
The voice did not come from outside. It echoed from within, deep and ancient, carrying a tone that felt both alluring and terrifying.
They took everything from you, and yet you still stand here, restraining yourself.
A subtle heat began to rise within Max's body, not like ordinary energy, but something far more sinister, something that carried a suffocating presence.
Look at them, standing before you, as if they own your fate.
The whisper grew clearer. Stronger.
They stole your bloodline. They destroyed your life. They stole your parents from you. And now, they dare to stand above you.
The infernal power pulsed violently, responding to the hatred in his heart, amplifying it, twisting it, turning it into something darker.
Accept me.
The words came like a promise.
I will give you power beyond anything you have ever known.
The air around Max began to tremble faintly, as if reacting to the awakening force within him.
I will give you the strength to crush them.
His heartbeat slowed, yet each beat felt heavier, echoing with a growing intensity.
I will give you the power to make them suffer, to make them beg, to erase them completely.
The whispers no longer felt distant. They were right there. Inside him.
I will help you kill them.
The infernal demon power surged again, no longer dormant, no longer suppressed. It clawed its way upward, drawn by his fury, eager to take hold, eager to break free.
Take it. Take the power you deserve. Take your revenge.
1549 Fury burns the heart, 3. A strange silence fell over Max as the whisper coiled tighter around his thoughts, no longer something distant, no longer something he could ignore. It was right there, pressing against his will, offering him everything he desired in that moment. Power. Revenge. Destruction. For a brief instant, his gaze flickered. Then, he smiled. It was not a normal smile. It was twisted, filled with a chilling madness that made the air around him grow cold despite the violent energy rising within his body. It was the kind of smile that came when restraint finally shattered, when something deep within a person chose to stop holding back.
Give me.
Max murmured softly, his voice low and dangerous, as if he had already made his decision long before this moment arrived. The hesitation vanished.
Infernal demon transformation. Full release.
The words echoed like a forbidden decree. And in the next instant, a beam of red light released from his body tore through the air into the clouds. Just at that happened a violent surge of power erupted from within his body, spreading outward in a terrifying wave as if something ancient had been unsealed. His aura twisted, no longer pure, no longer stable, but warped into something dark and oppressive that made the very space around him distort. His skin began to shift first. A deep crimson color spread rapidly from his chest, racing across his body until every inch of him was stained in an intense, blood-like red. It was not just his skin. His entire being transformed. From his hair to the very tips of his fingers, even down to his toes, everything turned into that same terrifying shade, as if he had been reborn from within a sea of blood. His hair darkened and then ignited into a crimson glow, strands lifting as demonic energy surged through him. His eyes, which were already red, began to glow in deep shades of demonic red. Then came the pressure. It exploded outward. The ground beneath him cracked as a suffocating demonic aura descended upon the surroundings, so heavy that even those watching from afar felt their breathing hitch. It was no longer the aura of a human. It was something far more sinister. Something that did not belong. A sharp tearing sound echoed through the air. From his back, two massive wings burst forth, formed from pure demonic energy. They spread wide behind him, dark and ominous, their surface rippling like living shadows, exuding a presence that felt both ancient and destructive. At the same time, his forehead began to change. The skin split slightly as two curved horns pushed outward, growing steadily until they stood proudly atop his head. They were dark, sharp, and menacing, carrying an aura that radiated absolute dominance. Max's transformation was complete. He stood there in the sky, no longer resembling the human who had arrived moments ago. His entire body radiated a terrifying red glow, while his demonic wings stretched behind him, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light itself. The horns atop his head gave him the appearance of a true infernal being, one that had stepped out from the depths of hell. And his eyes. They burned. Not with light. But with endless hatred. Just as the infernal power surged higher, threatening to consume the last remnants of his sanity, Max forced himself to hold on. The darkness clawed at his thoughts, whispering endlessly, trying to drag him deeper into its abyss, but at the very edge of losing himself, he gathered what little clarity remained. Then he whispered to himself.
Keeper's Dominion.
The moment the skill activated, a sharp shift occurred within him. It was as if an invisible force descended upon his mind, sweeping away the suffocating evil chaos that had begun to take root. The whispers vanished. The overwhelming hatred, though still present, was no longer wild and uncontrollable. It became contained. The infernal power still roared within him, but it no longer ruled him. It obeyed to his will. Max inhaled slowly, his crimson eyes regaining a chilling clarity as his thoughts aligned once more. The demonic aura surrounding him did not weaken. If anything, it felt even more terrifying now that it was under his control. This power, it's even stronger than before, he thought, a faint flicker of realization passing through his mind as he felt the sheer magnitude of strength coursing through his transformed body. And then, his figure vanished. There was no warning. No visible motion. One moment he stood in the air like a demonic sovereign, and the next, he was gone, leaving behind only a faint distortion where he had been. The elves barely had time to react. Before one of the guards could even shift his gaze, Max appeared directly in front of him. Too fast. Far too fast. The elf's eyes widened in shock, his instincts screaming danger, but his body could not keep up. There was no time to defend. No time to evade. Max's fist drove forward. It did not stop. With terrifying precision and overwhelming force, his hand pierced straight through the elf's chest, tearing through flesh, bone, and organs as if they were nothing. The impact was brutal, absolute, leaving no room for resistance. For a single moment, everything froze. Max's arm emerged from the elf's back, drenched in blood. Silence followed. A suffocating, heavy silence. The elf guard, a peak law manifestation realm expert, stood there with his eyes still wide, his expression locked in disbelief as his life slipped away in an instant he could not even comprehend. Then his body went limp. And collapsed. The scene shattered everyone's understanding. All around the hexagonal barrier, every single person stood frozen, their expressions turning from curiosity to complete shock.
What?
Someone's voice trembled, unable to even form a complete sentence. A peak law manifestation realm expert, killed instantly by a single strike by someone who had just moments ago been dismissed as a reckless fool at the peak of the rebirth realm. Their gazes shifted back to Max. No. To that figure. That being. The crimson body. The demonic wings spreading behind him. the dark horns curving from his head. The suffocating aura that felt like it came from the depths of hell itself. He no longer looked human. He looked like a devil that had descended into their world. The shock deepened.
What is that thing?
That's not a human.
How did he just kill a law manifestation realm expert like that?
Disbelief turned into fear as the reality of what they had just witnessed began to settle in. Even the major forces who had remained indifferent until now felt their expressions change. The young woman from the Sword God Palace narrowed her eyes, the calm in her gaze breaking for the first time as she stared at Max's transformed figure.
That transformation.
She whispered, her voice no longer as certain as before. Not far away, the members of the accession hall had gone silent, the earlier mockery completely gone from their faces. The young man who had laughed moments ago now stood stiff, his eyes locked onto Max with a trace of unease he could not hide. 1550 Fury burns the heart. 4.
How dare you kill one of us?
The moment the elf guard fell, the atmosphere snapped. The remaining elves no longer held back even a fraction of their killing intent, and at the center of it all stood the elderly elf, his expression completely twisted with fury as his gaze locked onto Max's demonic form. The sight of that crimson body, those horns, those wings, it did not instill fear in him. It ignited rage.
You devil.
His voice trembled with suppressed killing intent, his aura surging violently as golden light erupted around him.
You will pay for this with your life.
The moment his words fell, a radiant golden sword condensed within his grasp, its brilliance blinding as it hummed with terrifying power. He did not hesitate and brought his sword down carrying the full weight of a peak law manifestation realm expert. Seeing this, Max did not move. Instead, he raised his left hand. And took it head on. Bang! The collision exploded like thunder. The moment the golden sword struck his arm, a violent shockwave burst outward, rippling through the air like a storm. The ground beneath Max's feet could not withstand the force and shattered instantly, cracks spreading in all directions as the impact drove him slightly into the earth. Yet, he did not budge. His arm held firm, his crimson skin resisting the blade as if it were made of indestructible metal. The golden sword trembled against him, unable to cut through. The surrounding air distorted. Even the hexagonal barrier in the distance flickered faintly, reacting to the violent surge of energy. Max's eyes burned brighter. Then, he moved. There was no technique to it, no concept. It was just raw power. The elder elf's eyes narrowed as he reacted instantly, golden light surging once again as a radiant shield formed before him. Bang! The fist collided with the shield, and the impact detonated like an explosion. A second shockwave erupted, stronger than the first, tearing through the